You're listening to We Are STS, a podcast from the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. Hi, everybody, and welcome to We Are STS, and welcome to UCL. I'm your host, Professor Joe Kane. It's a beautiful summer's day here in STS, and we're delighted you're going to be here with us. Today, we've got an experiment. Can AI replace the kind of conversations we have in a podcast like this one? We're asking because there's a new feature in the software Google Notebook. It creates an audio conversation that sounds like people talking about the stuff you give it. There's nothing you have to do, just upload and give it a few minutes. The output sounds like a conversation, and it sounds, well, that's what we're testing. The experiment today is to upload an academic paper, ask it to generate a conversation, then press play. Is the result? Well, is it any good? For our experiment, I'm choosing a paper that I wrote that I really wanted to talk about on the podcast. It was published earlier this year. It's a story about fossil hunting and a bunch of twists and turns during one specific expedition. We're splitting today's episode into two parts. Part one is the experiment. You'll hear the conversation generated by Google Notebook based on my paper. It's unedited and straight from the machine. In part two, I'll be interviewed about the paper and about the conversation produced by Google Notebook. Our guest interviewer is our producer, Capri Huffman. Capri's an expert digesting academic work like this. She can spot the main points and she can spot the subtle points. She's a pro at precisely the kind of comparison and contrast that we want for this experiment. Ultimately, we want to know about the strengths and weaknesses of this particular type of tool. And of course, the big question, can AI, can it replace our podcast? Let's hear from Google Notebook first, then we humans will pick up the microphones for a chat.
Imagine this with me. It's 1939, right in the heart of the New York World's Fair. Picture the scene. Black ties, elegant gowns, maybe over 200 distinguished members of the Explorers Club gathered in the Grand Ford Motor Pavilion. On stage, a rising star in American paleontology, George Gaylord Simpson, is absolutely captivating the audience. He's just back from Venezuela, spinning these thrilling tales of daring flights over exotic lands, and even announcing the discovery of the world's highest waterfall, Angel Falls. It sounds like an unqualified triumph, the kind of scientific expedition that defines a career, doesn't it?
It really does sound like that. But what's truly remarkable here, and what the audience definitely didn't know, was the stark reality behind those stories. Simpson's expedition had actually been, on the brink of scientific disaster. It was plagued by an astonishing run of bad luck, relentless rain, and maybe most critically, a severe lack of the very fossils he went there to find.
Wow. So, what does this all mean for us then? In this deep dive, we're going to unpack the incredible, almost unbelievable true story of how George Gaylord Simpson, alongside his ingenious wife, Anne Rowe, managed to transform a fieldwork catastrophe into a public relations triumph. Their journey wasn't just about science. It became this masterclass in radical adaptation, ingenious improvisation, and the sheer undeniable power of strategic storytelling. We're drawing directly from a fascinating research paper, Came 2025, When Fieldwork Goes Wrong, Go Public. George Gaylord Simpson and Anne Rowe in Venezuela, 1938-1939, which really pulls back the curtain on this.
Yeah, that paper meticulously details how they navigated these immense challenges. It reveals a very different side of scientific exploration than the glossy, perfect tales we often hear. It's really a testament to human resilience and ingenuity when things go wrong.
Okay, let's unpack this grand plan they had initially, because it started with such high hopes, right? By 1938, George Gaylord Simpson was already a significant figure, a rising star in American vertebrate paleontology from the American Museum of Natural History, the AMNH. He was prolific, known for fieldwork, getting his hands dirty, and he was only 37 years old.
And he wasn't alone on this journey, which was somewhat unusual for the time. One of the really fascinating aspects is the inclusion of his new wife, Dr. Ann Rowe. She was a research psychologist by training, and the sources emphasize her contributions were truly fundamental to the expedition's design and operation, even when things went sideways.
And this wasn't just any expedition from a, let's say, geopolitical standpoint either. It was happening during Venezuela's exciting renaissance, a period fueled by booming oil revenue. The government was actively inviting foreign scientific expertise. This also aligned perfectly with President Roosevelt's then-new good neighbor policies for inter-American relations. Made things smooth. In fact, the Venezuelan Ministerio de Fomento actually paid all the field expenses. That level of government support sounds almost unheard of today, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. It really highlights a unique window in time for scientific collaboration. And with that backing, the original scientific goals for Simpson's expedition running September 38 to May 39 were quite ambitious. First major objective, San Miguel in the northwest near Barquisimeto, he aimed to collect Pleistocene mammals, Ice Age stuff, hoping to fill a big gap in the biogeography of northern South American mammals.
Okay, so Pleistocene mammals in San Miguel. Were there other major scientific goals?
Yes. The second primary goal was more focused. Travel southeast from Caracas to Zaraza in Aragua State. There, he hoped to find a specific Middle Tertiary or Miocene astropather fossil locality. Astropathers were these unusual, large, extinct hoofed mammals unique to South America. So, they had a clear plan. Ambitious, scientifically sound, at least on paper.
But, as well as any field scientist knows, reality in the field can be brutally different from the plans. Simpson and Rowe arrived in Caracas, spent 2 weeks, then headed west to San Miguel. Almost immediately, Simpson realized the fossil potential had been wildly exaggerated. He was somewhat crestfallen and discouraged. Can you imagine that immediate hit after all the prep?
Oh, it must have been a devastating blow right at the start.
Yeah.
The few fossils they did find were poorly preserved, crushed, incredibly hard to extract from the rock. Simpson's frustration is just palpable in his journals. He wrote, "I've never done so much work for so small a result," and even more starkly, "I wouldn't give a peseta for our collection to date," basically saying it was worthless.
A peseta. Yeah, that says it all. Sounds like a grueling start. And Ann Rowe faced her own unexpected challenges too, right? Initially, she planned psychological interviews, but her Spanish wasn't quite up to scratch for that. So she hastily learned the rudiments of preparing skins in the field for mammal collections. But even that was tough. Finding animals was hard, and the humidity made preservation a nightmare.
That's right. And her role as camp boss also proved unexpectedly difficult. Supervising a cook and foreman, all in Spanish, constantly struggling with supplies like getting safe drinking water. It was a full-time, demanding job, really far from her academic background.
And then, as if things weren't bad enough, the weather, the absolute unforeseen disaster, the rains. Mid-November 1938 brought an unusually heavy, rainy season. Simpson described it bluntly. It rained and rained and rained. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It completely washed out Simpson's quarries, damaged the waterlogged specimens they had collected, and made any new digging impossible. He wrote, "My quarry is a sea of mud."
Yeah, and it wasn't just the digging sites. The damp, the moisture, it created an absolute nightmare everywhere. Rowe noted, "My skins and skulls would not dry and began turning green with mold." And she added that truly memorable detail. Everything in camp, including the toothbrushes, molded, and we weren't always sure about ourselves. Even the toothbrushes. That tells you how bad it was.
Absolutely. It's a small detail, but wow, it paints such a vivid picture of the constant damp and decay they were living with.
Exactly. Later, Simpson himself admitted the San Miguel collection was not proportionate to the enormous labor involved, and the bones were not well preserved at best. A very, very far cry from the triumph he'd later describe at the World's Fair.
So, okay, they're stuck on this hilltop camp, facing this huge scientific failure, endless rain. They were determined, though, to avoid coming home nearly empty-handed. They clearly needed to adapt, to pivot, fast. This led to their first ingenious shifts in strategy, didn't it?
Indeed. To combat the boredom and salvage something productive, Simpson decided to write a new travelogue. He'd published Attending Marvels about Patagonia before, so it wasn't totally new, but it was a definite shift from finding fossils. The new project was titled A Million Years in the Tropics, Observations and Adventures in Venezuela by George Gaylord Simpson and Ann Rowe Simpson.
That's quite a title. What was the focus for this new venture?
It was designed to mix the expedition narrative with chapters on paleontology, geography, Venezuelan politics, cultural commentary. Simpson consciously focused on people, culture, and custom in Venezuela. This gave extra value to their daily journal entries and the chain letters they sent home. It provided a productive alternative outlet during all that forced idleness. It really shows that need for purpose, right? Even when your main goal is blocked.
Definitely. And when even the travelogue material started to run dry because they were still stuck, they turned to fiction. This is really remarkable resourcefulness. Starting December 3rd, 1938, they began writing a murder mystery together, Trouble in the Tropics.
Yes. The plot involved two American scientists, a cynical male mammologist and a beautiful, clever, and recently broken-hearted psychologist who meet, solve a murder, and, fall in love in the jungle. They alternated writing chapters, finished 15 chapters in about 15 days, using pseudonyms Michael Larch and Clarissa Van. Simpson noted it, quote, tided us over a period of inaction that would otherwise have been deadly. It shows adaptability isn't just about science plans. It's changing the very nature of your work to find value, keep morale up.
And Anne Rowe was busy beyond the novel too, wasn't she? Her contributions just seem immense throughout this.
Absolutely. She kept working on a monograph she later co-authored, even amid the chaos. And interestingly, her presence as Mrs. Simpson actually changed the camp dynamic, became more like a home in the eyes of local matriarchs. This led to unexpected social events, more local side trips, and actually resulted in a richer photographic record for the expedition. Her role was far more than just supportive wife. She was integral to their survival and diversification strategies.
And despite the overall failure in San Miguel, before heading back to Caracas, they did manage a small win. They prospected southwest into the Andes, found several important and promising deposits of tertiary mammals. Okay. So, not enough time for major work, but they returned with, admittedly minor scientific results, but definitely some valuable alternative accomplishments.
Which brings us to the real game changer. Because just like San Miguel, the second original goal, finding that Astropathera site near Zaraza in February 1939, also proved discouraging. The specific fossils just weren't there in the needed quantity or quality. So facing another dead end, that trip was actually cut short by an unexpected addition.
Okay, this is where the story takes that truly wild turn, right? Mid-December, President Lopez himself announces a geological survey of the remote Gran Sabana region in southeast Venezuela. And Simpson and Rowe get this enthusiastic, almost last-minute invitation to visit one of the survey sites. Simpson, ever the opportunist, jumps at it. Told his family it promised to be a great adventure.
Yeah, this invitation appealed to Simpson for multiple complex reasons, way beyond just paleontology. First, there was simply the irresistible pull of adventure. This region was the lost world of popular imagination. Think Conan Doyle. These enormous Tepuy plateaus, flat-topped mountains rising straight up, incredible landscape. And it was populated by indigenous communities rumored to have little outside contact.
Like something straight out of a movie, just incredible.
Exactly. Second, there was definitely a scientific competitive streak. Other AM&H guys, zoologists like Chapman and Tate, had been there. Simpson, being competitive, surely wanted to say he'd been there too. Third, it reinforced his man of science identity. It let him improvise entirely new scientific work, applying his method to any field. He was confident about that.
And he had this real fascination with local cultures too, didn't he?
Precisely. Finally, Simpson had this enormous appetite for new languages and new encounters. He'd even learned Mongolian dialects for planned fieldwork that fell through. He loved connecting scientific and local names for species. So this was a prime chance for what he called cultural voyeurism. It does raise interesting questions, doesn't it? How much of exploration is pure science versus personal interest, competition, or even wanting recognition?
That's a great point. And what's fascinating here is that expecting no fossils in Gran Sabana, Simpson just enthusiastically pivoted to anthropology. He started measuring Indians' heads, meticulously studying Kamarakoto's language, vocabulary, culture, social systems. He took great pride in it, saying this will be a good test of my claim that a real scientist could transfer his scientific method to any field. That's powerful intellectual agility.
Absolutely. It really challenges that stereotype of the hyper-specialized scientist, shows how a core method understanding can cross disciplines. It also subtly reveals the pressure scientists feel to always bring something back, right? Even if it's not what you went for. Rowe's mammal collecting stayed unproductive there, so she focused on botanical collections and supporting Simpson's anthropology. It was a complete radical shift.
And then came the moment, the sensational, career-defining moment. Angel Falls, March 8th, 1939. Jimmy Angel, the American bush pilot who first publicized the falls, offers to fly Simpson, Rowe, and others around Ollantaytambo, including over the falls themselves.
Simpson was just staggered by the sight. His notes are full of awe. Grand, awesome, awful, beautiful, marvelous, terrible. It makes the grandest famous scenery of the world seem puny. And crucially, he immediately acted like a scientist. He recorded readings from Jimmy's flight instruments, calculating the falls might be 5,000 feet high and nearly 1 mile. This verification by respected scientists was absolutely key in legitimizing Jimmy Angel's earlier claims, which had faced a lot of skepticism.
And he had his Explorers Club flag with him, which he strategically brought out. Symbolically, it validated the scientific nature of his travels, even though, technically, it was approved for the failed San Miguel project. Talk about improvisation.
Brilliant improvisation.
So after all the trials, the mud, the mold, the pivots, the actual paleontological results from the whole trip were far below what was originally anticipated, way below. But despite that, Venezuela became an unqualified success for Simpson and Rowe. Why? Because, as the paper says, Simpson decided that coming home nearly empty-handed was not an option. To rescue his position, he chose to go public. This is the ultimate pivot, turning mud into gold through amazing storytelling.
That's precisely the heart of it. The largest direct research output wasn't fossils. It was Simpson's massive 460-page monograph, Los Indios Camaracotos, published by the Venezuelan government, no less. It was descriptive linguistics and cultural anthropology. Simpson justified it as documentation and salvage of a vanishing culture. And he proudly claims it lacked professional bias, showing his confidence in applying his scientific method broadly.
And importantly, he made sure Anne Rowe got proper credit for her massive contributions too, right? That needs highlighting.
Absolutely. Simpson ensured her inclusion in formal reports. He called her contribution one of the first technical reports on the mammals of Venezuelan Guyana. He explicitly credited her for the mammal collections that helped his work on indigenous animal names. It really speaks volumes about their partnership and his recognition of her vital role.
And then, of course, Angel Falls. That story just took over, didn't it? It became sensational.
Right.
His unimpeachable scientific account, backed by those measurements, countered the earlier doubts about Jimmy Angel's claims. This led to them appearing on Robert Ripley's famous Believe It or Not radio program, Simpson, Rowe, and Jimmy Angel. Simpson's scientific credentials were front and center to back up that mile-high claim. He really was a master publicist.
He absolutely was. And he smartly leveraged his Explorers Club connection, giving talks, loaning artifacts for exhibits, all to cement that image of the successful scientific explorer. If you think about the bigger picture, it shows how crucial a scientist's public image and narrative control can be, especially when fieldwork hits snags or doesn't deliver the expected results. It's about shaping the story.
So what happened to those earlier creative projects? The travelogue and the murder mystery they worked so hard on during the rainy season?
Yes. Those projects, born out of the San Miguel struggles, were sort of quietly minimized. They were never published, despite some initial attempts. The Grand Saban experience, especially Angel Falls, was much, much better as a public narrative. It just completely overshadowed those earlier salvage attempts. The drama was too good.
So what's the ultimate legacy of this incredible roller coaster expedition then? Simpson never went back to Venezuela, but the experience undeniably launched him to celebrity status as a scientific explorer. Images from Venezuela were apparently all over his office for years, a constant reminder.
And importantly, he immediately pivoted again, back to his core work within the walls of AIM&H. He started conceptualizing and writing fundamental theoretical works like Tempo and Mode and Evolution, which was hugely influential in evolutionary biology. The Venezuela expedition became this keystone episode in his and Rowe's life story. He shrewdly used it to leverage new opportunities for himself and, significantly, for his equally capable scientist wife.
So the big takeaway here seems to be that fieldwork is truly risky business. It's unpredictable. Simpson proved to be an incredibly agile and resourceful researcher entrepreneur, someone who adapted, improvised, and quickly pivoted to create new products he thought would have value. For Simpson, coping with these huge problems and finding any way forward, that was, in itself, the definition of success.
It really was, a testament to resilience and ingenuity. It demonstrates that sometimes the most significant outcomes aren't from sticking rigidly to the plan. They come from responding creatively, strategically to adversity, finding new paths to impact, to recognition.
So as you've heard, George Gaylord Simpson and Anne Rowe transformed what looked like a failed scientific expedition into a resounding success. Not by sticking to the plan, but by boldly pivoting. They completely redefine what success could look like, from scarce fossils to documenting a culture to verifying the world's highest waterfall.
Yeah, this deep dive really reveals that sometimes the best insights or successes don't come from rigidly following that path you set out on. They come from embracing those unexpected turns, adapting creatively to challenges, and, crucially, strategically sharing your unique story with the world.
So we'll leave you with this thought. What unexpected pivots or even apparent failures in your own work, your own pursuits, could actually be opportunities in disguise? Opportunities for a new, maybe even more significant kind of success. We hope this deep dive encourages you to look for those hidden opportunities in your own journey.
Hi, everybody. It may not sound like it, but you're listening to WeAreSTS. And you're listening to an experiment. Can generative AI replace this kind of podcast? We gave the AI service Google Notebook an academic paper and used its interviewing tool to, well, create an interview. After the break, our producer, Capri Huffman, and I will talk about what we just heard. How does it match what we think is important in this paper, and what do we think about it as a piece of communication? But before all that, let's just take a short break.
I guess just to start us off, what did you think of that podcast?
It's really weird to hear, isn't it? There's always a contrast between what I think I said and what readers think I said. But here, what's weird is it's so literal.
Yeah, I guess from my own experience of listening to that podcast, it seemed very much like it was just repeating back what your paper actually said. In the podcast, it focused a lot on the particular details of what you were saying in the paper and some of your takeaways, maybe, but maybe the more moralistic ones, like resilience and ingenuity. I swear they said those two words at least 20 times.
I think the key thing there is the word actually, right? That it's giving us back actually what's there. And it's not inventing new knowledge about the world. It's just taking what we give it. So like you and I are really good at picking up text and subtext. Right, you never pick up subtext in this particular paper.
So it sounds like the Google Notebook in particular maybe doesn't have a wider context in which it situates the knowledge that you give it.
Yeah.
Have you tried this with other AIs or?
No, I
any
haven't.
Thoughts about?
I really haven't. And I didn't, for a particular reason, I didn't want it to know more about the key characters in the story. I didn't want them to know like they were born and they died at some time. I didn't want it to know that they lived in a particular place or whatever. I wanted it to be
so you wanted the AI's knowledge to be limited.
And that may disadvantage the experiment because I know a lot more. And so if you interviewed me about the project, I could tell you a lot more. But in a way, what I wanted to see what it would do if this is all it had.
So you isolated the variable.
Hey, that's a really good way to say that methodologically. Well done. The linearity is important here. That what the AI is doing is it's seeing the paper as a linear set of words, right? And then because it goes from a really long paper to a really short conversation, it's curious what it did cut out. So it felt like to me it cut out big parts. But then it's got to choose which parts to cut out. And I think it kind of chose the boring bits to talk about, and it missed the exciting bits that,
really?
Or at least the bits I thought were exciting.
Which ones?
Well, the boring bits were the bits that they tried to do some paleontology and kind of failed, or they did some prospecting and it failed. Like, that's just boring. Expedition fails. Who cares, right? But the exciting stuff is that story of what happened when they were adapting, right? So they spend half a year getting nothing, and then this opportunity arises. They're like, wow, let's go for it. And they're in a really exotic landscape. They see it as exotic. They're treating it that way. And the stories they tell about, hey, what'd you do while you were away for a year in Venezuela? It's all about that stuff. And the linearity of the AI, the sort of saying, okay, we're going to tell you this story in the paper. It's this. It kind of fails the journalism test. Suppose what we would talk about, if we were to talk about the paper solo, the first question you would have is, Joe, what's important about your paper?
Yeah.
Right. The most important thing is not the first sentence. The most important thing is the most important thing. I suppose the thing I would say to the engineers is, think about journalism school and think about what they teach you. Think about how do you take something that needs reporting and how do you create a report about it, if that makes sense.
A report that people will actually want to hear.
Yeah, it prioritizes want, right? And the linearity is not want. That is what the paper says, but it doesn't answer the question of what's important here.
That's your advice to Sam Altman.
Yeah, exactly. Go back to work. Figure this out, Sam.
Back to school.
Yeah. And I suppose because one way to sell this kind of tool is it's a reading tool for people who are multitasking. Oh, yes. You know, podcasting is incredibly important for multitaskers, right? So people listen to podcasts when they're running or doing the dishes or whatever, right? So reading academic papers, people say, I don't have the time to do that because I got to do my other thing. If you could absorb an academic paper while you're commuting, while you're staring out the window, while you're doing the dishes, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be very helpful. It would be much faster if this podcast was actually a replacement for reading your paper. That did take me a bit longer than 17 minutes.
Well, exactly right, and you could see the dream. But I think if, like right now today, if somebody said, hey, I'm going to take all my academic work and I'm going to shove it into the system so I don't have to actually read anything, I'll just listen to it, I think, that's probably not a good idea.
I would be very worried. Well, I wouldn't do it myself.
But maybe there will be a day when we will.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I know plenty of students will put their readings into ChatGPT and ask it to tell them the most important parts.
Not just students. I mean, it's hard to resist nowadays because you open up a software like Adobe and the first thing Adobe tells you is your document's way too long. I'll summarize it for you. Or, we're getting in the systems here at UCL. We use the Microsoft Office package and they've just added Copilot. And it's impossible to avoid it. It's not just students. It's everybody is getting the opportunity to get these summary versions of things. And you think, well, I wouldn't mind as a way to begin getting to know something, because you probably have been asked to read 500 pieces of work and best will in the world. That's a very steep mountain to climb.
Yeah, actually, I don't know. I feel like I come at this from a bit of a particular position because I've actually been vegetarian my entire life. Like, my mom raised me vegetarian. I never tried meat. So I've always kind of gone around having to say no to lots of things, lots of foods. I just have to explain to everyone. And I don't know, I think maybe that kind of prepared me to be able to just say no to more things. So I very much try to avoid using AI in my own work, not just on moral reasons, but also just because I feel like displacing my own intellectual work will eventually, there was that paper that MIT published recently that talked about how cognitive offloading happens when people begin relying on AI to do their intellectual work. That was very much part of the conversation before that paper came out. People were worried about that, but I guess having that codified in that paper, giving it that legitimacy of showing that this is actually happening, or this actually does happen to people who rely on AI too much. I guess I just don't want to start down that path myself.
In the world of publishing, it's certainly academic publishing. One thing that they invented in the 20th century was you write an abstract for every paper you write. And the abstract was meant to be a very concise summary of what you think is the most important thing. And there were two reasons to have that. One is so that it's a lot cheaper to circulate one paragraph of an abstract than it is 30 pages of paper. And so if you're trying to disseminate the world's knowledge as far and wide as you possibly can, having an abstract is a way to do that. And the idea was, it's not the paper, it's the abstract of the paper, it's the starting point. So it's designed to hook you in. And if the kind of AI summaries, the AI processing like this kind of conversation, if they work as a hook to get people to read the whole thing, great. But in the same way that an abstract is not the paper, a conversation is not the thing. And the sad moment will be where people forget that. And they think, well, I've read the paper. No, you didn't. You just heard 17 minutes of a processed bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, when you're writing an essay or something, you look at 50 abstracts, and the abstracts are all very useful, but once you actually start reading, there's so much more in there that you can also apply to your own work. That's what I always find.
Yeah, and so as a sifting tool, maybe good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's okay. As a replacement tool, nah, definitely not. But there are lots of contexts in which abstracts replace reading, or like book reviews replace reading the book, and that's a real shame in the world because there's so much missed when that act takes place. But I certainly feel that listening to this conversation and thinking, man, I spent all that time on that paper, and there's such great stories, and you missed the part about whatever. But ultimately, that's got to happen if you're going to condense down. But my own reaction was this AI process missed some of the big points of the paper, and it went after what you were saying. It went after specific catchphrases. Mm-hmm. One example, I walked away thinking not only was the language a bit sensationalized, so like they talk about extraordinary expedition, a big thing, a massive, that kind of language, but also it tended towards like the lessons at the end are lessons that you might get in a business school. And it's resilience. In order to be resilient in a world, you have to be adaptive. You think, well, yeah, I did say that, but that wasn't the point of the paper.
Yeah. When I was reading your conclusion, it wasn't a morality tale for your readers to apply to their own lives. Like, it's fine if they do. It's very nice if they do. But your point was about science communication. So interesting that didn't come out.
Yeah, but I think my guess was that it's because that says more about the AI than it does about anything else. And the AI is probably chock-a-block full of business school kind of books because there are a lot of them in the world. And if you're training a language model to predict where your vocabulary is going to go, if you spot a word like resilience or pivot, the system will say, oh yeah, this is coming from a business context, and that's really what we're trying to get to. I mean, I don't think that the system thinks that way, but it did feel like it became very much like one of those self-help guides for business, and it did echo that vocabulary. And again, I think that that's really interesting. It says something about AI, that if maybe we should shove more history into the AI systems and see if we can just slightly edge the language in a different way. I don't think it was all awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. I mean, one thing that I did notice is you explicitly said in your paper, you talked about the backstory of Angel Falls. In the very beginning of that podcast, it says that Simpson discovered Angel Falls. He didn't. It was widely known. The controversy was over how tall it was. It got your own paper wrong.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And again, I think that's a really important point to make, that in its rush to condense, it's leapt a couple of things, and it has made a connection that otherwise wasn't there. There were a couple of other like really specific things that it felt like it was doing that too, that it was coming to certain conclusions. And I was thinking, no, I didn't say that. Like, please, I didn't say that. And as the super footnote-oriented, specific academic that I am, I do worry about that. But again, I think that raises some really important questions about if we come to over-rely on this kind of technology. When do I stand up and say I've been misrepresented? And this is a pretty trivial example. But what if it were some policy document that became really important? And the conclusion was like, no, we shouldn't do this. Whereas the whole crux of the policy document was yes. That would be weird.
Yeah, I did a project last term about geoengineering, read a bit about IPCC reports, and it's interesting. I think it was in Merchants of Doubt. they talked a bit about how the summaries for policymakers sometimes are very different from what the rest of the reports actually say.
Press releases are the same, where sometimes the press releases are really quite different. But the point is the press release gets reported, and 3 days later somebody's actually read the documents and hang on a minute, it's really quite different. But again, ultimately it's a question of, do you read the condensed version or do you go back to the original, and how do you kind of depend on this? And it could be done by mistake. It could be there on purpose because they wanted to emphasize things to politicians. It could be done by manipulation, that they purposefully head in one direction or another. But all those things, ultimately the answer is go back to the source.
Part of the issue with AI is just that it might be accelerating that. Like, people don't even have to write the summary for policymakers. They get AI to do it.
Perhaps what we've done is, in creating a labor-saving device and using AI to condense the work, we've actually added more work because somebody's got to read both the original thing and the condensed version and then consider the relationship. Like, did they do it? Did they summarize it accurately? So the labor saving is, in fact, labor making.
If that extra labor actually gets done.
Yeah, exactly right. And you're right to be skeptical, right? Because who's going to do that?
One of the things that I found really interesting in the paper was your discussion of how Simpson turned to anthropology. What did you think of how that was treated in the podcast?
I thought the conversation missed a lot of the points that I thought were important. So, for example, this is a moment of first contact between kind of the North and South. The anthropological goal of trying to capture something that was on the verge of disappearing was interesting. The negative attitude of the North Americans looking at what the Venezuelans were doing to indigenous peoples, I think it didn't pick up on anything like that. So essentially what happens is Simpson and Rowe go on this expedition. They don't have any duties, so they make up their own work, this anthropological study they get going on. And one of the reasons they're doing it is because they feel like this indigenous community is at a moment of contact with the outside world, and what they see the outside world doing is not a very positive message. They're introducing a lot of junk and a lot of garbage and a lot of destabilizing things. And Simpson takes on the view that we got to capture their language and their culture now because it's going to be destroyed. It doesn't come up in the conversation. Or just the sense of exploring a part of a country. It's not unknown because the people there know a lot about their country, but the northern Venezuelans, the government, if you want to call it that, it's their first period of being able to encounter that part of their own territory in a meaningful way. They think there's gold there. I mean, they think there's oil there.
Of course.
There's riches there.
Gold.
Yeah, and the hope of that space. There's also a humanitarian mission, which is, medicine and Christianity, if you want to call that humanitarian. There's a lot of reasons to be there. But I think in the rush to condense, I think the AI just kind of ran over all that and just said the specific, which is they went there. They went there, they did stuff.
That seems like such a shame because, it seems like that anthropological book that Simpson wrote was one of the more important things to come out of his trip to Venezuela at all. Colonialism is a very live discussion nowadays. I wasn't very aware of the idea of even internal colonization. That's kind of a novel idea to me, but of course, that's what was happening.
That's exactly what was going on in that moment, and he's a witness to that, and also a skeptic. Basically, they're saying, no, I don't think this is a terrible idea. These people are destroying what's going on here.
I was actually quite pleasantly surprised by how Simpson viewed that. It makes you kind of wonder if it was avoiding the controversy, or...
Well, that's a great question. My own guess is I didn't really push that notion of this is a colonizing moment more than just saying that it was. It would be nice to have in the AI-generated conversation maybe some questions left unanswered, and that would be one that I think would be really a strong one to ask about that moment or about the people involved or even about me as a historian. What kind of historian talks about a moment of internal colonization but doesn't really get into it? But again, that notion that the stuff you hint at or the stuff you point to just gets passed over because the system is too literal for you. It only wants to go with what you say, not where you point. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. But like with a dog, if you point, a dog looks at the tip of your finger, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't look at the thing you're saying. It's over there. And that's perhaps a nice metaphor here, that it's a really smart dog, but it just doesn't get what a pointing gesture is. I was absolutely fascinated by this story being a story of failure, because it did fail.
Yeah.
But then what do? They come back and they claim victory, and like, are they lying? How did that happen? If you knew the story of the weather events and the crappy fossils they found against their ambition, it was nothing. But then they told it. The weirdest thing was, it is the first story in Simpson's autobiography. It is the opening page. We are up in the clouds with Jimmy Angel flying around, and he's lost, and we think we're going to die. And that is the story. That is the beginning of the narrative that he wants to tell about his whole life. And you think it ain't because they're up in the clouds. It's because that moment is part of the Venezuelan narrative. That moment is part of a really important life story for them. And again, I think the AI kind of missed that, but it's the idea of, we all have these moments that we think are like our very special moments in our lives. And I suppose the subtext of this particular project is to say, it's Venezuela, baby. That's the moment that when you're 85 and you're sitting back with a cup of tea, thinking about your life, and you're reaching for your photo albums. Which photo album do you reach for? And my kind of the subtext of this project is, it's Venezuela for these two. And I think I know why.
That's interesting that you put it in such a personal way. Like, it's not just, like, they don't talk about Venezuela all the time just because they managed to make it such a big PR success. It was also a personal kind of turning point. I think that probably holds true for a lot of people, that when they're backed into a corner, they're going to try something that they never would have thought that they would have done otherwise. They find something out about themselves that way, and that becomes memorable because of that.
There's a couple of layers there, isn't there? There's the personal feeling of, I don't want to spend a year and come back with nothing. My professional direction is grounded in the idea that it's going to be a success. I do find fascinating what they did when they got home. And you could have just said, well, we went there, we collected some fossils, we did this anthropology, and it was all very interesting, and now let's move on. But that isn't what they do. That they kind of use the story. They selectively grab one bit of the story. And man, they ride that for years. They tell that story. We want to use words like manipulate or exploit or overuse or whatever. That's our cynical world right at the moment. But you think of what, you said it exactly right, which is, what would we do in a moment like that? We've all been on trips where it's not gone well. And then when we come home and people say, how was your trip? And we all say, it was great. It's the rare event that you come home and say it was a disaster, that it just didn't work out, whatever, right? It was the rare event. But then this is one of those kind of moments, and they found a way to go for it. The subtext is, by watching them do this, we can see something about their own relationship. Another subtext is we can see a moment where, like, the stories we see as historians, there's more underneath those stories than we might see at face value. So an expedition goes out and they come back success, but all expeditions go out and come back as a success. But was it the same thing they said at the beginning? Right? We're looking for dinosaurs. Hey, we brought some shells back. These are brilliant shells, and they're really like new species of shells. Yeah, but you said dinosaurs. And you think it, definitely without saying there's right and wrong in those cases, because I don't think it's right and wrong. But I find it absolutely fascinating, that process of adaptation.
I feel like your paper in general just adds a lot of human color to the process of science. And I think that's something that's definitely missing from mainstream scientific discourses, that there can be pettiness and squabbles and interesting internal politics in science. That's not part of the main narratives that we hear about science in popular science communication, I guess. So it just adds a lot of human color, which I think you've been emphasizing both in this paper and in the conversation.
Let me ask you, Capri, what do you think is a takeaway from an experiment like this, where we've got a paper and an AI-generated conversation? What do you think is worth remembering about this?
I have a couple of takeaways. For one, just with the paper, I think it's good to be reminded that science is done by people, and they have colorful personal histories that we can also learn from, not just their scientific knowledge. As for the AI, I think it's been an interesting experiment, and I guess what we can take away, it's kind of a fly in amber for this current moment of where the technology is, and we'll just have to see how it evolves from here, and hope to maintain a convivial relation to it as we do.
Would you encourage students next year to use something like this?
AI can replicate mediocrity executing steps. Like, AI can read a paper for you and give you the Cliff Notes summary, but I mean, nobody ever said reading Cliff Notes was the same as reading the book. Being a student is about learning how to read the book in the first place. Like, once you know how, that's another thing to be using AI to do your work for you and make your summaries. But if you don't know how to do the work in the first place, then I would be worried. So no, I would not recommend, unless you already know what you're doing. Thanks very much, Joe.
Well, thank you very much, Capri.
Nice.
Well, that's the experiment. What do you think? Of course, I know you're thinking that paper of mine, well, it just sounds brilliant and fantastic and masterful, and you just can't wait to get your hands on it. Well, the good news is it's available for free on open access through UCL Press. It's in a volume on popularizing paleontology. You'll find a link in the show notes, and there's loads of other great studies in that volume too. It makes for really super summer reading. Well, what do you think about the conversation produced by Google Notebook? Remember, all it had was the paper itself. It created that product in about a minute. That technology is moving so fast. And of course, we're hearing AI voices in more and more places now. Probably in a lot more places than we realize. You know, it feels like we're on the cusp of something really big here. If you know someone interested in the things we do here in STS, well, just ask them to get in touch. Maybe it's to explore stories about how new technologies impact our culture. Or maybe they're interested in how we govern emerging technologies more generally. Or maybe, just maybe, they're interested in the history of moments like ours, when it seems like revolutions might be taking place and taking us in fantastic new directions. These all fit under the umbrella of Science and Technology Studies, or STS. We are a thriving community here at UCL, and there's always room for more. Music today included Rollin' at 5 and Sweeter Vermouth, both by Kevin MacLeod, and both available on the website incompetech.com. Special thanks to Google Notebook for their conversation, and very special thanks to our producer, Capri Huffman. I told you she was our new secret weapon. WeAreSTS is a production of the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. If you want to find out more about the show, listen to past episodes, or give us some feedback, just visit us online. Here's the address. It's ucl.ac.uk/STS/podcast. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. We'll have another episode ready soon. Until then, just remember there's knowledge to be found just about everywhere, and that together we are STS. Bye now.
You've been listening to WeAreSTS, a podcast from the Department of Science and Technology Studies at University College London. Subscribe to the show and join us online. The address, ucl.ac.uk/STS/podcast.